This program is designed to provide general information with regards to the subject matters covered. This information is given with the understanding that neither the hosts, guests, sponsors, or station are engaged in rendering any specific and personal, medical, financial, legal, counseling, professional service, or any advice. You should seek the services of competent professionals before applying or trying any suggested ideas.
Hey, if it's Tuesday, it's Giving Tuesday, first of all. It's holiday season for everybody. Thank you for everybody who's watching. We start our second season on movie reviews and more starting right now. We did 51 out of 52 straight shows. Who would have seen that one coming? I had no idea we were going to do that. But today is a special show. It's a special show because Nonstop is on. No, that's not why. That's because we got Kevin on. We've got Colleen on. We got our engineer Roxy on. So we're live on K4HD Radio TV, Talk 4 Media, TV, radio, and podcasting. Streaming on iHeartRadio, Pandora, Amazon, Apple TV, Roku, Amazon. Am I forgetting something? On over 221 platforms around the world. And here's the thing. It's also streaming on Worldwide TV Entertainment, LemononTV.tv, IT247 out of Franklin, Tennessee. And Terry, we have 4,600,000 plus views just in Tennessee and still going strong. Right? That's a great thing. So the good thing about this, so I have to say this because I adore Colleen. She just popped out of no place all of a sudden, and I've been watching her for years now. Not only is she a cancer survivor, she's got 3 books. She's got over 20 online courses. She's probably got 21 today because she doesn't stick around to do anything. She's an author, healer, writer. Social media guide. What else does she do? She's got a PhD. If she doesn't have it yesterday, she's got it today. And I think she's somewhere on a beach, right, Colleen? Where are you? On a beach, right? Yeah, see? She is. And with that, so this man is interesting. I've been hearing about him for years. I don't think we've met, and I don't think I've interviewed him. And if I did, it was for a film Iris. So, award winner, producer, writer. I gotta throw a director in there. CEO, founder. I love his company. And it's one of the things there, he's got this book. And I haven't read it yet, but I'm looking forward to reading this. Let's see. If it's Audienceology, I think that's correct, Kevin, right?
That's right.
And how moviegoers shape the films we love. Now, the reason why that's important, he is one of the 100 most influential and important people in the world. I say that's wrong. I think he's one of the most influential people in the world. And the reason I say that because of the things that he's done. So, without further ado, welcome everybody to Thanksgiving weekend. We're almost out of this year. So, Kevin, I got to start off with you first because talk about this book. Why am I reading this book? I haven't even read it. I've been hearing about you for years. I've interviewed all those people, some of the producers and directors and screenwriters who probably made cry on changing their film. They became successful. Talk about that.
Oh, boy. First of all, my loss that I have not had the pleasure of spending time with you, Brian. And hi, ladies. It's great to be on with you as well. So, the thing I do is a very unique part of Hollywood that not a lot of people know about. It's done and has been done since movies began, really. We test movies. That means we create and conduct movie test previews where we recruit regular moviegoers to come and watch a movie that has yet to be released, and we show it to them, and we gain and garner feedback based on how the movie's landing with them and for them. And so then we take that data and we distill it and we present it to the filmmakers, to the heads of the studio, et cetera. And those comments really have made some substantial changes in nearly every movie that has been released in modern moviedom. But again, from beginning of time, Charlie Chaplin, man, and Buster Keaton and Harold Lloyd, they take their comedic sequences up to Hollywood Boulevard and they would show them to a group of moviegoers at the end of a movie that was playing up there. They'd stand in the back and listen to the reaction. And from that, they were able to say, I got to go back to the drawing board, or that really is working.
Well, and that makes sense. And it's almost like, Colleen, is you being that author, I've always wondered about this, and it came up in my mind today as I was walking, because I walk and talk on the phone a lot, and I was just thinking, when an author has that book and what they're writing about, I just wonder how that all comes about. And I'm going to go back to Kevin because I'm tying it in. Colleen, tell everybody what you do, why I think you're special, and being that survivor of having cancer at the age of 14 and then traveling the world and just blowing everything up.
Yeah, well, I think one thing Kevin's sharing, and I think it's really important, and it is something in an industry that's not recognized in Hollywood. So I've recently learned more about it being an author, and it's definitely not something that people realize, that transition of being an author of a book and then being a writer of a script, like going into film. And so my story, I was diagnosed with cancer at age 14. I was told that I'd have to be on medication, 1 pill a day for the rest of my life. And that when I wanted to have kids, it would be really challenging. And so at 14, you don't understand what that means. I'm like, okay, you're on a pill a day, medical bills, seeing a specialized doctor and all this stuff. And so I really changed my life in 2017 when I left the corporate world and I moved across the world to New Zealand because I just knew something needed to change. And that was when I started yoga and meditation 4 hours a day. And my first book came through me. And that didn't create my second, my third, my fourth, all the other books that I've done. But that book really laid such a strong foundation for where my life was going to come, because it's when I began to understand kind of the world of imagination, the world of where you can write your life into existence. And that line between fiction and reality is easily movable between things. And so I got off the medication I was supposed to be on for the rest of my life, which was incredible. They would say that if you have half your thyroid and you're not having the supplements of the hormones, you shouldn't be able to have a lot of energy or function a lot. And as those of you who know, the past 3.5 years of my life, I've created more than I did the first 3 years of my life, and more than a lot of people create their whole life. But what happened that really changed my life, which was my third book, is that I created an unhealthy relationship, or co-created, and I became pregnant. And within that decision, I chose to let my child go within 6 days of the first missed period. But what was interesting, I talked to a film writer, a film producer, what he was sharing. It wasn't that I let the child go because I didn't think I was going to be a good mother. I let the child go because there was a love that was missing from the significant other. And he was sharing with me more about Roe versus Wade and that movie and this. And so we kind of were going into what my movie would be like, or how this would be as it's all unrevealed, it's unraveled and revealed itself. And so I hired a script writer, and we have it going out to a script PR firm, or a script one that's in LA or whatnot, in a couple of weeks. But that's been a process. That's kind of funny, Kevin, that's what you said, because it's I just learned about this, and it's definitely a journey, but it's not something I would have ever planned when I was in my corporate job selling sales equipment, that I would have been learning about this, or even when I wrote my first book. It's just not something you quite think of.
And with that, Kevin, you make me that just made me think of La La Land for some strange reason. And I've never asked this question. How does a screening audience, because we've heard about it in the Junket interviews all the time. Oh man, the people didn't like the test screening. They want to change the ending. They want to take the scene out. And I'm like, are you happy with it? I'm like, yeah, I'm happy with it, but I'm not really happy with it. And then the movie goes on to do great. Kevin, this is where your territory comes in. I've never, and maybe you know the answer to this. When there's a book, they always say, oh, it's not like the book. Well, of course not. Oh, the movie didn't do justice to the writing in the book. How do you find that in between and making it work so people actually go out to support that best-selling book, or book they've never heard of that's turned into a movie or a web series or a TV series?
Well, if it's based on source material like a book, most people don't read, to be perfectly candid, and so to have a book of the kind of scale you're talking about is one thing, like a Da Vinci Code. That was in the zeitgeist. Everyone had read that, right? Or a Jaws back in the day. You know, everyone read that on the beach. Those were cultural phenomenons, right? But most books are not like that. And what I like to tell filmmakers is many books don't translate well to film because the filmmaker feels so beholden to being absolutely true to the book. And they're different mediums. One is a visual medium and one is a word medium, right? And so often the images, what you can say in 3 pages of book, you can do in an image on the screen. Not to mention the structure, primarily the act 1, 2, and 3 structure is a different structure than often a book structure is. So you have to sort of distance yourself, filmmaker, and know that I'm serving an audience who's coming out to see a film of this source material, not a recreation of the book. And that's a fundamental difference. Do you follow? That's a fundamental change of how you should approach bringing your material to life in any way, whether it's a known book or not a known book. But when it's a known book, you will often get naysayers saying, well, they left this out of the book, they left this out. But a majority of people have never read that book.
Yeah.
So you might say we might offend a few people, but they're going anyway because they love that book. So they're going to see that movie. But you're going to make other people who aren't familiar with the book really interested in the visual presentation of that. So you're doing a better job by serving the medium you're in.
I would always joke that back in the day when I was just doing nothing but watching films, I don't go to the movies to read the book. I go to be entertained, to educate, which is where the 4 E's
Well,
come
that's
from.
another thing, Brian. You're absolutely right. Because what is a movie? But people go there to be entertained. And the entertaining doesn't mean a happy ending. It could be a very sad ending. It could be a tragic ending. It could be, the pathos. There could be, but it's an elevated experience of why they're going to see a movie. And you have to keep that in mind. It's not spinach. They're not going to take medicine. They're going to enjoy the experience. So when I test a movie, I always like to tell filmmakers, look, I'm just the messenger. And my book was originally called Don't Kill the Messenger, because I'm just giving you my feedback, man. I'm just telling you what the audience is saying. This is not my opinion, right? So you can choose to listen or not choose to listen, but these people are coming out to want to love your movie. They're not leaving their homes because it's just some way to fill their time. Time's important to these folks. They're going out because they really want to love your movie. So give them what they want. And so if they're being critical, they're not being critical to be critics. They're being critical because it's just not landing for them.
So Roxy Terry, so you guys remember Moonstruck? Roxy, you ever seen Moonstruck with Cher in it?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Okay. So, all right. So, Colleen, I don't know. Have you seen Moonstruck, Colleen, with Cher?
I haven't seen it, but I was going to say I really liked a lot of things Kevin said. I had something I wanted to share, but go on.
All right. So, Kevin, talk about what Moonstruck was.
Oh, yeah, that is okay. So Moonstruck is a great example of a great change that took place with the most subtle thing ever. So imagine, if you will, now, Colleen, I'll explain it quick. It's really at the core of it a comedy. It's a comedic. It's a serio comedy, but it's people are given permission to laugh. Okay, but in the first test screenings, when we tested the movie originally all those years ago, directed by Norman Jewison, the audience took a long time for them to warm up to the audience, to the movie. They weren't laughing. And the way the movie started was a beautiful Italian opera, whatever it was, right? But very serious, and Cher's walking down the street, etc. And the scores came back, and they were played far worse than one would have imagined that movie because the movie was really good, but it was just such a long ramp up. So the editor said, I think they don't have permission to laugh. So they said, let me play with something here. They had another screening the next night. I think we were in Paramus and New York City. And I think the first one was in New York City. Then we went to Paramus the next night, or vice versa. And so he went into the editing room. And because it was the beginning, it was only one reel. He was able to change the music cue for the second screening. And what he changed it to was when the moon hits your eye like a big pizza pie, that's amore, And so that created a light, fun atmosphere, and people started laughing as soon as they saw Cher, and as soon as they interacted, and as soon as the family is with their hands in the Italian, and and so it changed the trajectory of the whole experience because of one music cue, one very important music cue.
That's really interesting.
And that's what
music always. Well, I was just going to say that it's kind of crazy psychologically how different songs will bring up different energies in you. So I kind of feel that's, because some music can make you angry, some music can make you happy.
100%, Terry. Music is so music.
It's a
really,
frequency.
Yeah,
it's
it's a frequency, and it really dictates what you are feeling and going through. So it's real music in a movie is so important, and to not be too heavy-handed with the music either, to indicate or to thrust upon you a feeling that is not earned. That's another thing. That's a way to disabuse or abuse music, abuse music rather than having it serve you and help you.
And one other thing I just wanted to add, because you were talking about, reading a book rather watching a story on film. The beauty, though, sometimes of reading a book, though, is that everybody's going to probably interpret that book a little bit different, and they're going to visualize it a little bit different. With a film, you're seeing what the director wants to see. So it is a totally different medium, and it's a totally different experience. And I think reading a book is, unless I'm off, is a little bit different for everybody. And a different way they see the character.
A book is a soul medium. I mean, a writer can write the book, a novelist can write a novel, and if they don't like it, they could put it in their drawer. A painter can paint a beautiful painting and can, put it in the back of their closet if they don't like it. If she doesn't like that painting, there it goes. Boom. But a movie is a art form that has many artists that it takes to put on the show, if you will, from the artistry of the production designers, the writer, of course, the editors, the cinematographer, the actors, the director, the producer, all of these experts in their field, costume, etc. Right? That's funny. All of these folks are needed and necessary to make a great movie. And that's what I love about the art of movie making. And it is arguably the most incredible art form ever to be popularized outside or throughout the world. And it's America that's done it,
Yeah, and I guess what I like what you're sharing too a lot, and this was something that even inspired me, is when I was sharing the story of what happened, then I was going deeper into it with this producer who has different things. He was like, this would be added outside of your book to the story. And I was like, oh my God, that makes so much sense. And what he said is he would say, you have to think about, yes, your book, but this is a full multisensory experience of your life story that would be happening with someone, with the music, with this. And he started saying this, and then I started pouring out more of my story that wasn't in the book, things that I left out, the little pieces of it that I was like, oh my God, I totally see that. And then I would see as I was having this conversation, this was a month and a half ago, maybe now. And as I was saying more of this, I could see the parts that needed to be dramatized already, more. I could see the things that needed to be added so that person in the seat could be educated on the emotion I was feeling. They could feel a cognitive experience to life. They could bring it alive or something like that. And I think that was go ahead.
Oh, no, Colleen, what I wanted to say is that's a really good observation. And I have to say that I talked about it being a sort of a cumulative effort and a lot of artists to make, but there is usually the most successful movies do have a singular vision. Sometimes it comes from the director, often it does, most of the time it does. Sometimes it comes from the producer. Sometimes a star is really involved in the production and steering that, but it's usually the director. It's kind of a director's medium, movies, in that respect. So the only thing I would say to you is make sure that you truly trust the person that you're getting in business with, who's going to represent your very personal and important experience, because you do have to give over to them, whoever that is, whether it's she or he or them or they or anyone, whoever's doing this representation of Colleen's life and experience. You need to have a degree of trust, and you could feel really safe knowing that it's going to be in hands that will actualize it in the way that you see, in common, and know that that person knows the medium that you're not as familiar with.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, though, no matter what, as a business owner, entrepreneur, it didn't start out that way, right? It was like one course, one book, but now it's grown to everything it's grown to in the online space. But I think that's part of leaving a legacy. Like, that's part of you that's part of you using your life for what this life was given to you for. I think that's part of it, because if you don't take those risks, I've taken lots of them, not in this way, but I've taken, I guess, in different ways I have. But when you do that, there will be failure. There will be things that don't work out, but the overall message, the overall core of everything I've always done has always worked out for the best. Even if it was a perceived failure, it still got me to the next place that created the next thing, at a quicker rate, at a more rapid rate, for more people to be impacted. So I love that you shared that. And I think as creatives sometimes, or as whatever our medium is of creatives, we can get so held back by that. Can I trust? Can it this? And it's I think there has to be also a little bit of release and a little bit of I don't know, you have your own framework of trust. Does this work? Does this, whatever. But then you just have to let it be for what it's meant to be, because it's the story was given to you, but you have to let the fiction and the imagination take over. Because if you want to impact millions of people, you have to let that go a little bit. And I think that's probably the art of what you were saying with film too, of why it's arguably one of the best arts, is because it lets people release just from this reality and go wherever it was, where there's parts of it that are real, but there's parts that couldn't. It lets people for a moment dream or go or just all these things. And I think, that's probably why definitely it's one of the best arts I could see, because there's so many, from the music to the director to the art to the lighting, even learning about lighting now. Oh my God, that's a whole thing in itself, just for movies.
When I see, when I conduct a test screening, for example, that's super important, because that's when the rubber hits the road. Imagine a person who you just described has their baby, right? And they have birthed this child that has taken 10 years. And now we're delivering it for the first time into the world. And it's being judged. Now, there's a tremendous vulnerability there. So I often see myself more of a consigliere or a rabbi or priest, as opposed to a researcher or somebody who's there to interpret what the audience is saying, because they really need their hand held. But what I like to say to filmmakers and to people who are exposing their children in this very, very vulnerable way is they're just there to give opinions. Now, you can do what you want with it. You don't have to listen to it, but it's just information. It's simply information. So if you digest it and say, that makes sense to me, I really like that, there's something to that. Because sometimes people will say something, they don't actually mean exactly what they're saying. So you kind of have to go, I think what they mean is this. And I can help them sometimes to suss that out. So it's not they don't really mean they don't like that sleepwalking scene from Macbeth, which is one of arguably the greatest scenes in the history of literature or plays. But what they really mean is the way it got into that scene, or the engagement, or the way the portrayal, whatever it might be. There's interpretation involved, but you have to have a degree of trust with the audience as well, to know that this is an art form that is going to ultimately be seen by a lot of people. Therefore, their feedback is important. It's not like a book. It's not like a painting. It's a movie.
Kevin, talk about this. The movie Get Out. Terry, did you see Get Out?
I think so.
I worked on it.
So. Okay.
Roxy, did you see it? She's like, I don't think so.
I'm not sure. I'm trying to think. It sounds very familiar.
So, Kevin, this is why I asked this, because I always tell people, if they're not seeing it now, they're seeing it usually after we talk about these things, because movies are there forever. And I want people, no matter if you're born now, 7 years later, because movies are timeless. That's why I came up with the 4 E's. And Kevin, you were one of the reasons, believe it or not, why I came up with this. The 4 E systems and it goes for a movie, book, CD, or piece of art. It's got to be entertaining, educational, emotional, empathy, empathetic, or exciting. One of those things like that. And it's because of the test screenings I learned from doing the junkets. When the director would come in and said, I hate test screenings. I go, why? And it goes, because they're ruining my baby. And I'm like, well, maybe it's just their opinions, which is what you said, Kevin.
Most of the great ones embrace it. I'm just going to let you know. Most of the great filmmakers, and I've worked with almost every one of the greats for the last 35 years, embrace it. Ron Howard, for example.
He loves it.
He embraces it. He uses it in a way that really helps, and he listens. He's not going to do something that is against the integrity or hurt the integrity of the movie, but he likes to hear is what he set out to do being communicated with that audience, you see? And but I agree with you, having those heightened things. I love the E's, the 4 or 5 of those E's are all, quite important. Get Out was an interesting scenario. I worked on the movie. Now, Get Out was a movie that was kind of really ahead of its time in a way, and it hit in the zeitgeist at just the right time of racial tension, of dealing with issues that needed to come to the forefront. And so, the question is, if that movie, as good as it is, was released today, would it have the same impact, maybe even more impact? If it was released 5 years before it came out, would it have the same impact? Who knows? Maybe not, maybe more. I don't know. Probably not as much. It was at the perfect time. And when we tested it, it was very interesting. It was very much, there were commonalities that came together. And then there were also very significant racial divides between how people saw that, both African Americans and, say, non-African Americans. And it was interesting to see from a marketing standpoint where they came together and where those separations were, because it was important for us to recommend to the studio how to think about both of those scenarios, right? Because you wanted to bring everyone together, but you also wanted to speak a language and a messaging that was going to resonate with particular groups who were dealing with these very significant issues. At the end of the day, the thing was fun.
And I think it was one of the most scariest movies I've seen in a long time, and it was well done.
Brian, I'd venture to say it hits all your E's, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It hits all your E's.
It was eerie. It was exciting. It was.
Oh no, you just added another one. Eerie was not. Now you're in 6 E's. Okay, we'll take it. I'll take it.
But I was going to say one thing. Oh, go ahead, Brian.
Oh no, Colin, go ahead.
I was going to say one thing too. I love that you just said, Kevin. I think this is something that's cross industry that's so important. So I'm doing my PhD and I start my dissertation next semester, which is exciting.
Congratulations.
Yes, I'm so pumped. And so even there, the best researchers, right? Even those, relatable to what you shared maybe is the critical race theory, or we could look at different cultures. There's a lot in there. But the best researchers, right? Qualitative or quantitative, Dr. Brene Brown, you aren't afraid to have an idea of what you think something, of what you want to research, of what you want to find out, and being totally wrong, because the data is going to show you what it is. So that would be what you just shared, crossing over in film. And in ways, it's definitely crossing over in writing. I'm sure definitely my 4th book that comes out next year. And I never knew I was going to write a poetry book that's also coming out next year, but I started writing poetry on social media, and then so many people were like, you need to write more poetry. And then I just did it. So it is that thing of you can't be you can't be, whether it's research, it's film, it's writing, it's video, it's podcasting, it's radio, whatever your thing is, you can't be so glued to what you think the idea is. Like, you're always going to be testing, because in whether creative, a performer, I mean, you call multiple words that kind of mean the same thing across industry, researcher. When you're doing that, it's like whatever has the most reliable consistent, like, yes, this works, result and data, and you can't engineer that. And I think that's maybe why so many people get frustrated, is because they want to start out like a mathematical equation. If I do these things, all the right things, it'll line up just right. But the beauty in movie making, I think, of what I'm learning here, what you're sharing here, is there's that extra room for emotional instant feedback that can happen. I mean, not over 10 years or billion, but instant feedback when you're watching the film. When someone's watching art, when someone's reading a book, I don't always see that feedback. You can't see that feedback. This gives you that opportunity of instantaneous, what is the thing, to really make it a life, I mean, more than a lifelong, I mean, a legacy for forever, and whatever the world does. Like you just said, 5 years before, 5 years after, looking at that, I mean, that's an exciting conversation to be part of. And can you remake something? Can you redo something? Like, that's an exciting space.
Colleen, it's interesting, and Brian brought this up before. There was a great filmmaker who I just read this, and I thought it was sort of profound. He said, he said, I make movies for the big screen. That's how I design them. Okay. But that doesn't mean that I don't like that they're shown on other platforms. It just means that that's how I've chosen to bring my art realized, is in a movie theater. Now, most people are never going to see that movie in a movie theater. Most people are going to see it on a smaller screen in some fashion. And this filmmaker said, my favorite movie of all times is Jaws. And guess what? I've never seen it in a theater.
Ooh.
And then I said, how many people say my favorite movie is Casablanca, or On the Waterfront, or Citizen Kane, or whatever it may be? And yet, who's seen those in a movie theater?
That's profound.
Well, Brian, you have.
Yeah.
All right. You know what I'm saying? You're not a normal person.
That's true. I'm not normal. I'm a movie whore. I'm a movie whore.
You're a movie freak. Oh, I was being kinder. Okay.
The only thing I could think of with something like that would be like a 3D experience, like something like Avatar, where I could see like that one was like, I mean, you can watch it at home, but that would be one. Or like, maybe, I don't know. Maybe you can see 3D movies at home now. I don't know. But that's profound. That's a very interesting. So my whole career, I make it for this, but I don't even like, that's pretty.
Well, I mean,
yeah,
I
wow.
It's because it says to me that the story, the elements, the underlying nature, the DNA of what you're creating in a movie and what audiences respond to can translate to any platform. And that's what I find great about movies and about where we're going in the future, because clearly movie going is going down, and it will continue to go down as streamers come up and as other modalities come into the fore. And that's not a bad thing. It's just a thing. And the younger generation, Gen Zs, I can tell you right now, have very little interest to go to the movies like I did, say, when I was a kid. I went to see once a month, maybe. Now, kids are seeing a Gen Z is between like 6 and 24 years old. They're actually seeing like 3 or 4 movies a year, and then there's like hundreds released, right? So you're like, why would I leave my home to see that movie? So now you have a whole nother issue that we're dealing with test screenings, which is, are they quote unquote movie theater worthy, or are they something I can easily see at home? And that has an economic kind of economic outcome. Like, you want to know that beforehand. You want to kind of gauge that beforehand so that you don't make something for too much money. One of the great things that I have learned in my many years doing this is that I've discovered that every movie every movie, this can probably apply to every book, if made and marketed for the right price, should make money. Every single one. If you have a movie about dirt, you may have one website that have dirt fanatics, people that love gardening or what, but it's only one website that is going to feature this movie about dirt, and they'll pay $1,000 for it in perpetuity, for all rights in perpetuity, right? Now, if you make that movie for $900, you'll make $100. But if you make it for $2,500 and you say, "Wow, I made this movie for nothing, $2,500," you're going to lose $1,500 because you didn't do your homework before to understand how wide your audience was. So I urge filmmakers to really understand, artists of all kinds, to understand if you're making a commercial product, know what you have beforehand. It's actually what my second book is going to be about, called How to Score in Hollywood, which is the assessing what the DNA is of something, sizing it early on, and then making good business decisions based on that.
Oh, I love that.
And I think, yeah, that's going to be very powerful, Kevin. And I wanted to say one thing I like that you shared about that, because when I started my journey, it was a little bit different. But I was always a marketing background. So it was kind of funny because I've been in marketing and sales since I was very young. I've always known it. So in some type of way, because of that, I would argue, I haven't written this, but I do have a book coming out called Creation, which is creation marketing. And I would argue, because I've knew that always, it led me to take more risk, or gave me more certainty on my risk. So like my first book, I didn't know self-publishing, published, no idea about it. Then I started learning about publishing. Okay, if you get the right publisher, then you can maybe get a 5-year contract and get a published book a year through a bigger one. And which one do you want to go for? What person? And then if you get the PhD, that adds something else to your credibility. Then I started learning these inner goings in a way. But the whole time I was building my business, my first book, my second book, my third, now the next ones that come out next year, and my courses, I've learned. I tested a lot of marketing things. So in the way, I didn't do that. Well, I don't know. I guess it's not like I intentionally thought, did I do this? But at some basis in my life, I did always act from that place, whether that was how I grew up, or I got a marketing degree.
Sounds to me, Colleen, that you have always acted from a place of authenticity and following your heart, and you can never go wrong. I tell artists that all the time. I was a child actor myself. I was trained formally at one of the best acting schools in the country, at Mason Gross School of the Arts at Rutgers, where I worked in the Meisner technique, working with Bill Esper and Catherine Gately, and very proud of that. But that often informed a certain kind of deep understanding about how character worked, right? And peeling away the layers and getting to the thrust and the truth of the essence of whatever you're doing. And it sounds like you, Colleen, have really followed your heart from the beginning and keep evolving that as time goes on. I discuss that in my book, in Audienceology. I talk about my background and how many of us who are listening out there can, I think, take away from both of what we're saying, the importance of being true to yourself, authentic to yourself, and then not being afraid to put it out into the world. It's brave to do something like that. It's hard to write a book. It's hard to write a book, and then it's really hard to get people to read it. And the same is true with a movie. In my book, you'll learn that how difficult it was to go from making this to finally getting it before an audience, and then what it took to get it just perfect to get it out into the world. And that is, to me, fascinating. That whole premise of that is so fascinating.
Hey, Kevin, talk about, what was it like when you won your Emmy? What was that feeling like?
Well, I didn't win the Emmy. Laura Linney won the Emmy for Best Actress, but I was certainly thanked on stage. And Laura, it was all right. So to answer your question, it was one of the most incredible nights of my whole life. And the reason is because imagine it took me 11 and a half years to make this movie. There was no reason why in God's green earth it should have been made. Like this was not a movie that was commercial almost in any way. It started as a play. I used to run a theater called Central Coast Repertory Theater in San Luis Obispo, California. And then it started as a play, and then it evolved into this screenplay. And then it wasn't until I got Dan Petrie Sr., who won multiple Emmys.
Excellent director.
Oh my God. Right. And he was like a grandpa to me. I miss him terribly. His wife, Dorothea, was one of the great producers. And my husband and I once went to their house for dinner, and we literally, there were 12 people or 10 or 12 people at the dinner table. We said there literally could be an Emmy at everyone's seat because they had so many of them.
Wow.
Anyway, Dan, because of Dan loving this, and Gary Lucchese and Marshall Persinger, my producing partners, and then getting that made took every ounce of perseverance and belief and honestly willing it to happen. And then it was originally Shirley MacLaine was on the movie, and Shirley dropped out at the last minute. And then the great Jenna Rollins comes into it. At the end, when Shirley drops out of it, you're thinking, what the hell? What's going to happen? We're 2 weeks, 3 weeks from production. And then Jenna Rollins walks into my life, who has to this day become one of my great friends and our great friends. And she's the most extraordinary actress. I used to dream of meeting her someday, and then not to think we'd ever become friends. So now you have Laura Linney, you've got Jenna Rollins, and a great other cast, Emile Hirsch.
Yeah.
And so we work our asses off. We are killing to make this happen. It's shown, we see it gets great reviews, and then we get nominated for 3 Emmys. And then that night, we're sitting in the audience, and the nominees are, and I have to tell you, these nominees were formidable, unbelievable, formidable ladies. And the winner is Laura Linney for Wild Iris. I thought I was going to collapse. I jumped out of my seat. I screamed to high heaven, and I just cried. It was like a catharsis. And then Laura got up there and thanked us, and it was just the most beautiful evening. And it just was a validation of what Colleen talked about before, about a dream realized. And I love that. And I love witnessing that with my directors and producers and heads of studios who spend years nurturing a project. Imagine being the first person, okay, that's in an audience that's seeing Titanic, that's seeing Get Out, that's seeing Something About Mary, that's seeing Borat, that's seeing Forrest Gump. The first time, no one's ever seen it or heard of it. And you're there experiencing with the audience. It's magic. It's magic.
Kevin, talk about this. It's one of those things where we would have press screenings. We used to see them, sometimes 3 months in advance. I'd be talking about these films. We didn't have hold the things, and most of the time at that point. And I'm telling the audience, you need to go see this film. And Kevin, you can relate to this. They're like, what are you talking about? We don't even know what you're talking about. I'm like, this film's going to be a hit. Whether it was the Full Monty, whether it was Something About Mary, and they had the swag and us, and we just couldn't wait for these things to come out. And it was one of those things where this is where we love movie going. I'm still that person who still goes to pay to see a movie to support the arts. And Colleen and Terry, for your future book, and even Roxy, if you write one, I tell all the authors, because Kevin, we have a lot of international best-selling authors on here who become our friends. I tell them, it's going to take a long time to do your movie. Don't expect it to happen overnight. That's not how it works. But when it does, hopefully you'll have that same feeling what Kevin was talking about. Because, Kevin, I did the interviews for your film. And it was one of those things where
Brian, bless your heart, Brian. Brian, how did you get into what you do? How did you find your way clearly as a movie lover, but what was it that got you into loving and reviewing and interviewing all things movies?
I come from the home video world, just like Ted Sardos. So I knew what it was like to go back to what Colleen said about marketing. I had to watch every single film, and I had to order them for different audiences. We had 3 independent stores, and I was going up against the Blockbusters and the Music Pluses and the 2020 videos and all these other stores.
Redbox.
And I saw everything coming. I'm good at seeing things coming down the pipeline, but I'm also good at adapting and adjusting where most people can't do that. That's what it is.
I do believe that's your secret.
It is. I tell people about this on the show, right, Terry? If you can't adapt,
Yes.
you can't adjust, you're not going to make it. But, here's the thing to the artists out there, those future, book writers. It's going to take a long time, but don't give up. Listen to what Kevin said and listen to what Colleen's saying, because Colleen's got a great story out there, and so don't a lot of other authors that from Hasmark. So, Kevin, you got to talk about this. I love your diversity program. Talk about that's why that's important. And London Tapestry, and then we're going to go back to Terry.
Oh God!
Can I just say sorry one thing? Can I say one thing, Kevin, before you go into that?
Sure.
I just want to say the other thing that Kevin, what you shared, which was important, is when I even say that I healed myself from cancer when I got off the medication, that was 10 years. That whole process from when I had to healing was a 10-year process. And so, yeah, even that to get somewhere. So it's, again, cross industry, cross culture. It doesn't happen overnight. So anyway, sorry, Kevin. I just want to say that before you get into the diversity
that's
program.
important. That's important.
You asked me about Tapestry and what was it, Brian?
Your diversity program, which I think is great.
Oh gosh. So I run a company called Screen Engine ASI. I've got about 300 employees, half full-time and half part-time. And we not only do test screenings of movies, but we also do pilot tests, probably on 60 to 70% of every pilot on broadcast, cable, and subscription services. We have the Dials. Remember the old preview house up on Sunset? Well, I bought that company about 7 or 8 years ago, and we have evolved that in a big way. Now we have biometrics with facial recognition and galvanic skin response measurements and eye tracking, and it's really cool. Wow. And so, because here's my feeling, whatever helps tell the story of the truth is what I'm interested in. And usually one of those things is not the whole truth, but when you add them together, you can tell a fuller story to get the truth to our filmmakers, to our studio people, to whoever our clients are. Screen Engine ASI does a lot of things in terms of custom studies on the state of animation. We just did one. We did another study on blockchain recently. So we do a lot of that sort of things. We do pre-testing for like live table reads. You know how every show or movie has a read around the table before they start shooting. We do that with professional actors, and we gauge the input before you shoot a frame of film. So we're giving almost a reverse focus group, if you will, on what to look for and avoid, so you don't have to have maybe costly reshoots later on. Those kind of things. So anyway, that's a general sense of what we do. It's very interesting. I just bought another company, which is what you're referring to, which closed yesterday, called Friday, called Tapestry. It's a London-based company, which is a smaller version of what we do. Very synergistic. Two guys I worked with in a past job I had, and great guys, Ian Wright and Kevin Thompson. They got very, very talented folks. So now we have boots on the ground in London. We've been increasing our footprint there and around the world because we work in something like 50 countries. And so it's a very exciting next step for Screen Engine ASI. I will say that part of what my efforts have been, and it was kind of when the Black Lives Matter movement reemerged and when the Me Too movement sort of hit its peak, a lot of CEOs like myself were sending out missives and saying, people are important to us, and there's truth in it, but I felt like I needed to live my talk. I needed to really walk the walk, and I set up a 10-point diversity plan within my company, which really is something that I've had to lead and inspire others to follow. And I'll tell you something, it's hard enough to come up with the plan. It's harder to maintain the plan and implement the plan and follow through with the plan. So mine has to do with blind hiring. It has to do with mentorship and seeking people. I'm in a field that traditionally caters to a lot of Caucasian folks. And so what do you do when you're hiring? You go to find people in the business, you hire other Caucasian folks. So I've had to go outside deeply and find and create a very diverse environment by looking outside of the traditional, even headhunters, or to find places to go to colleges, historically Black colleges, other disenfranchised folks who don't know that this is an area that they can go into.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a big change. We added 2 women of color to our board, pay parity, a path to growth. These were all very important things to people. And now we have an extremely diverse group. I'm so proud of our folks. We're over-indexing in African American, in Hispanic, in Asian, in LGBTQ, physical handicapped, age. Don't forget age. I love hiring people who are older than myself, I can learn from, who are better than what than what I do, and I'm really a believer in that. And I don't understand why people think young people only are the answer to understanding the digital world. Well, guess what? Older people, that's the messaging and the depth of the communication and the understand. That's where the real talent lies. Anybody can learn to do the digital stuff, but to have the gravitas of a true marketer, of a true researcher, that takes years to get. And so I really embrace people of a certain age. And lastly, I just want to say that we have to look at we measure people still in a very archaic way in the world. And when I say that, I mean we use demography to basically pigeonhole people, don't we? In other words, simple demography is males and females under and over a certain age, whether you're Caucasian, Hispanic, African American, Asian. By putting people in these buckets, what are we doing but really creating an institutional racism in a way? In other words, we're or genderism or sexism. We're putting people into buckets when in fact, look at the 5 of us on this call and you look at on this podcast, you look at us and you say, we probably all share in commonalities that go beyond our gender, our racial or ethnic identity, our sexual orientation, whatever it may be. But we are not going to be marketed to for the same things.
Yeah.
And that is a shame, and it needs to change. I don't know if it's going to happen on my watch, but I certainly want to lay the foundation for the next generations to urge people to not just sample by U.S. Census data, but by creating psychographic identifiers, behavioral, attitudinal identifiers. You know, there are certainly cultural cues that we can't ignore, but we got to think about things beyond this old way of looking at demographics, because it just puts people into buckets that are old and don't exist anymore. Just ask any young person.
And with that, we're out of time. Kevin, I got to have you back. Colleen, I got to have you back. We're booked 3.5 months ahead, but I got to have you guys back.
Oh, you're the best, Brian. I so enjoyed meeting you. And ladies, the best. Thank you so much.
So it is Giving Tuesday, and with everybody, support everybody's charity, no matter what it may be. And with that, I always say this: have a good night tonight, a better night tomorrow. And if you see someone without a smile, please give them one of yours, because the world needs it. I'm Brian Sebastian. This is Movie Reviews and More, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.